Marco had always been the subject of ridicule throughout his school years. From the moment he first stepped into the classroom as a young boy, he was made to feel like an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong. His classmates, especially one named John, would often make fun of him for his worn-out clothes, his quiet nature, and his background. The taunts and whispers followed him everywhere, lingering in the hallways, echoing in the corners of the schoolyard, and even creeping into the lessons where he was supposed to feel safe. Yet, among all those who belittled him, his teacher stood out the most. A figure who should have been a source of guidance and encouragement, instead became one of the people who reinforced Marco's feelings of worthlessness. This teacher had a sharp tongue and an even sharper sense of superiority. He would often make cutting remarks, disguised as jokes, about Marco's future, saying things like, "Not everyone is meant for greatness, and some people are just destined for simple lives." Though he never explicitly named Marco, the boy knew. Everyone. For them, Marco was simply someone who would never break free from his impoverished knew who those words were directed at. Background. They saw him as a boy born into unfortunate circumstances, doomed to remain in them forever. His family had very little, and it was an unspoken rule in that school that children from poor backgrounds would never amount to much. Society had already written his fate, and the people around him treated him accordingly. Marco's mother worked as a cleaning lady at the same school he attended. Every single day, after classes had ended and students had gone home, she would stay behind, tirelessly scrubbing the floors, dusting the furniture, and wiping the chalkboards clean. It was exhausting work, but she never complained. Despite her struggles, she held her head high, determined to provide her son with a future brighter than the one she had known. But instead of being admired for her resilience, she became the target of cruel jokes and unnecessary mockery. Jan, always eager to impress his friends, would throw sarcastic remarks at her as he passed by, saying things like, "Careful with that mop. You wouldn't want to make a mess of your masterpiece." Laughter would erupt around him, and Marco, standing nearby, would lower his head in shame, his hands clenched into fists. But perhaps the most humiliating moments came not from the students, but from the teacher. The very person who should have set an example of kindness and respect would often call Marco's mother over to inspect her work. He would stand in the middle of the classroom, pointing at invisible specks of dust, and shake his head in feigned disappointment. "It seems you've overlooked a corner again," he would say, making sure that everyone in the room could hear. "Maybe we should add cleaning lessons to the curriculum." The class would laugh, and Marco would remain silent, his face burning with humiliation. Despite everything, his mother never responded with anger. Instead, she would offer a quiet, tired smile and continue working. Marco often wondered how she endured it. How could she remain so composed when people treated her with such disrespect? One evening, when they were walking home together, Marco finally asked her, "Doesn't it bother you? The way they talk to you?" His mother gave him a gentle look, her eyes filled with both sadness and wisdom. "People's words only have power if you let them," she replied. "What matters is not what they say, but who we are." Marco wanted to believe her, but it wasn't that simple. The words, the laughter, and the humiliation, they all left scars, invisible but deep. Marco had dreams of giving his mother and himself a better life. He dreamed of a future where they would no longer have to struggle, where he could provide her with comfort instead of watching her toil day after day. But no matter how much he longed for success, there was always a voice in the back of his mind, reminding him of what others thought of him. "You'll never be more than a janitor's son. People like you don't go far." Those words weren't just insults, they became walls, trapping him inside a belief that no matter how hard he tried, he would never truly escape the identity that had been forced upon him. And so, for a long time, he simply accepted his fate. Years passed, and school eventually ended. Marco lost touch with his former classmates, including John and his old teacher. There was no reason for them to keep in contact. They had never been friends, after all. One day, many years later, an invitation arrived at the doorstep of every former student and teacher from Marco's old school. It was a formal letter, elegantly designed, inviting them to a grand class reunion. The event was to be held at an exclusive, high-end restaurant known for its luxury and sophistication. Excitement buzzed among the former students. The idea of reuniting after so many years thrilled them. On the day of the event, nearly the entire class showed up, dressed in their finest clothes, eager to impress one another with tales of success and achievement. But one person was noticeably absent: Marco. His absence, however, went largely unnoticed. No one asked about him. No one wondered where he was or what had become of him. And certainly, John and the teacher, who were seated next to each other, didn't spare him a single thought. As the evening progressed, the restaurant staff moved from table to table, taking orders. The waiters were polite, well-trained, and attentive, ensuring that every guest was given exceptional service. When it was finally Jan and the teacher's turn to place their orders, something unusual happened. The waiter ignored them. At first, they thought it was a simple mistake. Perhaps he had just missed them in the rush of the evening. But when they tried to get his attention, he barely acknowledged them. Instead, he simply said, "In a restaurant of this caliber, we have certain standards. We cannot serve just anyone." Jan let out a dry chuckle. "Okay, very funny. Now take our orders." But the waiter remained unmoved. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving them both stunned. Frustrated, Jan angrily called for the manager. The restaurant manager arrived a few moments later, walking towards them with confidence. As he came into view, Jan and the teacher's expressions shifted from irritation to pure shock. Standing before them, dressed in an impeccable suit, was none other than Marco. Marco looked at them for a long moment before speaking, his voice calm and controlled. "I instructed my staff to treat you exactly the way you treated me for years." The room fell silent. Marco continued, "You never saw me as worthy of respect. You mocked my mother for her work. You laughed at me for being poor. But things have changed." He glanced around the restaurant, then added, "This place, it's mine. And do you know who runs the kitchen? My mother. The same woman you once humiliated now leads the team in one of the finest restaurants in the city." A long pause. "You're not welcome here," Marco finished. Jan and the teacher, completely humiliated, had no choice but to stand up and leave. And as they walked out into the cold night air, they realized the weight of the lesson they had just learned, one they would never forget.